This is John Cressman with monkeyuncle.com, and this is part 4 of our platformer tutorial series for GameSalad. If you've been following along, your project should be in the current state. If not, please download it from monkeyuncle.com in our template section. What you want to do is you want to download Platformer Tutorial 003 and start with that, and you should be in the same spot. You also, if you haven't already, want to download the graphics from Kenny. I suggest going back to episode 1 of this tutorial series, and I explain exactly which graphics that you will need. Alright, with that in mind, we're going to start off by saving this. We're going to do a save as Platformer Tutorial 04. Remember, I do suggest that we save often. Today we're going to be covering not only lives, but also death and deadly objects. So we're going to be giving our little player multiple lives, and when he hits a deadly object, it's going to kill him. He's going to respawn, and we're going to add a little death animation, which should be interesting as well. So let's start off by going into scenes. We're going to open up the scene and go to attributes. This is actually game attributes. So we want to scroll down. We want to create 2 reels. We're going to create an integer, and we're going to create a boolean. So the first reel we're going to name spawn x, and the second one will be spawn y. The integer is going to be player lives, and the boolean is going to be called dead. Alright, so let's go ahead and set player lives to 3. And we're going to set spawn x to 150 and spawn y to 700, which is roughly the location on the screen of where we are at currently, where our little guy spawns. Okay. Now that we have those, we're going to create a couple actors. So let's actually go home to here, go into actors, and we're going to create 4 actors. 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to take the first actor and we're going to call it dead player. We're going to call this second actor deadly object. The third player is going to be called spikes. And the fourth player is going to be called HUD lives. This will actually display the number of lives that we have. Alright, so let's go ahead and file, save. And we're going to start off with HUD lives. We're going to go in here and change the size to 64 by 64. We're going to go open up our Kenny graphics. We're going to come under HUD, and along with all these other objects you should find our HUD player beige, and that's just a little face. That's going to be our icon that shows how many lives they have. So to do that, we need to come down here in graphics and go to horizontal wrap, and we're going to change it from stretch to tile. We just make sure that the tile width is set to 64. And now that we have that done, we're going to add a rule. And that rule is going to be constrain attribute. And the attribute we're constrain is HUD lives or self size width is equal to, and then here we're going to put a formula in, and the formula is game player lives times 64. So if the life is 1, the width is going to be 64, which will only display 1. If the lives is 2, it's going to be 128, which since we have it set to tile, will be 2 and 3 and so on. So now let's go ahead and go to scenes, and let's go ahead and place this little graphic. We'll put it right here in the center up top. I'm going to file, save again, and now let's go ahead and preview it and see what we have. Well, remember we set the lives to 3, so we have 3 little lives. So now that we have a few lives to play with, and just for fun, let's go back here to scene. And this is important because remember, we want it to scroll. So go to scene and layers, expand HUD, and just make sure that HUD lives is in the HUD layer. That way, as he moves, it will stay in the center. Alright, so now let's go ahead and back to actors. We're going to go into spikes. We're going to set the size to 64 by 64. We're going to go back to our platformer graphics, and this time we're going to go to items, and you should see, I'm sorry, that's not items, it's tiles. So if we come down to tiles, scroll down towards the bottom, you should see spikes. Just drag that over. Now we have a spike. And just as a point of reference, let's just come in here to physics and 0 all of these out. Change fixed rotation and remove movable. Now don't have any rules because really this is just a display. And the reason I do that is that way we can put the deadly object over top of it, and we can put it exactly where we want it, because depending on the object, like for instance this actually object extends above where the tips of the spikes are. We don't want him dying if he just touches the tip or this area that's clear. So we're going to come down here and go to graphics, and we're going to want this tile just like we did the little lives. So I'm going to change that tile wrap, horizontal wrap to tile, and make sure it's at 64. So now let's go back to our scene. We're going to take our spikes, we're going to plant them right down here, and take this and expand it. So we have a whole row of spikes down here. Now notice that it's on top of the one. That tells me that it's on the HUD layer. So let's go down to here, layer to the layers. We don't want it on the HUD layer because we want this to stay with the background and scroll. So let's just drag it to background. And actually let's move it below the player. Okay. So now we have it. I'm going to go ahead and preview, and we're going to just walk down here, and you're going to notice that, see, we can scroll. Right now it does absolutely nothing to them because we haven't made any rules. Now remember, we don't want it to, the spikes actor itself isn't going to actually do the damage. It's this deadly object, which we can put on anything. So let's change this color to red so it's easy to see. Let's add one rule, much like we did for some of the other, to change. So when it runs, we're going to change the color alpha to 0. That will allow us to see it while we're previewing, but we won't be able to see it when we're actually playing the game. So just like the other one, let's go down here. Oops, sorry. To physics. We're going to 0 these out. Fixed rotation, non-movable. We don't really want this movable. Now we have this little red area, and wherever that red area is, that can be our deadly area. So now let's drag this over. We're going to cover up the spikes. We're just going to bring this down right slightly below the tips of the spikes. So now if he touches this area, he's dead. I'm going to just tighten this up a little bit. There we go. And now, file, save, preview, And as you can see, we cannot see the spikes. I mean the deadly area. Now again, let's just make sure when we go into the scene, let's make sure under layers that this deadly object is in the background and not the HUD. So now we need our dead player, and I like to create a new actor for it, but you don't have to. The first thing we want to do though is create 2 reels. The first one is going to be called dest or destination X and dest Y, and we'll explain that in a second. Now we want to give this guy a graphic, so come into here. We're going to go to player. Now I happen to choose the hit graphic. I'm going to pull over here. For size, we want to make this 64 by 128, which is just like the picture graphic, the player image. And that's the way it's going to start. Now, much like the player, we want to give it gravity. But this time we're going to change this to 1000. And scene. And this should be 270, so it'll fall directly down. Okay. Now we have some gravity. We want to do a couple. Well, first what we need to do is test the direction. So we're going to hit attribute. If the attribute game player direction, remember that from last time, equals 1, which is left, then we're going to change an attribute. We're actually going to change 2 attributes. The first attribute is, remember, if it's left, this guy needs to be reversed, so we're going to go dead player, graphics, flip horizontally, true. The second one we're going to set is dead player, destination X. Now what we're going to do is we're going to give him a little kind of a jump back. When he hits something, he's going to jump back. So if he's heading left, we want him to jump back right, which means a positive number. So we're going to start position X plus 200. And we're going to, again, Alt or Option copy, and click and drag to duplicate this. And now we're going to do the same thing, because if it's not 1, then it's going to be 2. So he's going to be facing right, in which case we want him to go jump back left, so it's a negative number. And then the other thing we're going to do before we get into the interpolates is we're going to change dead player destination Y to self position Y, and we're going to have them jump up a little bit, so we'll change this to plus 200. So now we have our destination coordinates. So now we can do the interpolate. And all this interpolate does is it changes one value to another value over a fixed duration. The duration is going to be 0.25. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change the size, width. And he starts off at 64 and we want to double it, so up to 128. And then we're also going to self size height to, it starts off at 128, so we're going to double it to 256, and again in the same 0.25. And now 2 more interpolates, and those are for the X and Y. So we're going to change position X to dead player destination X, that variable that we set before. And we're going to do that in the same time. And the same for this one, except this will be Y. Dead player, position, Y, 2, dead player, destination Y. Now when it gets done interpolating, this will kind of cancel out the gravity. So it's going to jump back and then it's going to fall. So we need to test for when it falls off the screen. And we do that by checking the attribute, dead player, position, Y is less than, remember we want it to fall off the screen, so the way we're going to test that is dead player, size, height, divided by 2, but because we want it off the screen, this will be a negative number because it'll be below the horizon. And when that happens, we're going to do a few things. The first thing we're going to do is do a change attribute. Oh, I'm sorry. We're going to spawn an actor, and that actor is going to be player. And we're going to spawn them at game spawn X and game spawn Y. So that's the horizontal and the vertical coordinates. Now to make this work, we need to change the relative to scene, and everything else is fine. And after we spawn that actor, we're going to destroy ourselves. Right? So we don't have a way of spawning this right now, so there's no way of testing it. So now let's go into player image. And we're going to add a few things. Oh, I'm sorry, we don't want to go to player image just yet. Let's go ahead and do it. We'll take care of this first. So what we're going to say is we're going to create this rule, and we're going to say when attribute game dead is true, because that's the only way it's going to know that the player's been destroyed. We want to destroy this image as well. That way we don't have this extra image lingering. Okay, now I kind of got ahead of myself there, so let's go into player. We're going to do a couple things. Before we do anything else, whenever we spawn the player, we want to immediately set game dead to false. And after we do that, we want to add our collide rule. So let's come to rules, and we're going to say when the actor receives, overlap or touches a deadly object, then the first thing we're going to do is set change attribute game dead to true. Then we're going to do another change attribute. We're going to say game player lives is now equal to game player lives minus 1. And now we're going to spawn the actor we just created. So we're going to spawn our little dead guy. And again, we'll change these to scene, relative to scene. And the position is actually going to be player position X and player position Y. So basically right on top of ourselves. And then once we have that dead player, we can destroy ourselves. And because we've set this dead to true, the image will destroy itself as well. So now let's see how that looks. We're going to go ahead and preview it. We can see our 3 lives. I'm going to hop down here. There's our spikes. I'm going to walk over to them. Boom. And I'm dead. Now in this case, we spawned, but there's no player image. So the other thing we want to do, and before we do it, let's go into scene. We're going to come in here. We're actually going to kill this image. So go into scene, layers, player image, and remove it. Because every time we spawn a player, we actually want to spawn the player image as well. So spawn actor should go right underneath dead is false. You don't want to put it above, because at that point dead could still be true. And if it's true, the image will destroy itself. And honestly, it really doesn't matter what we put in here, because it's going to constrain itself immediately. But just to make it look a little bit better, we're going to put player position X and player position Y relative to scene. And now I'm going to come in here. I'm going to walk off, hit the spikes, and die. And now we popped right back up here. Notice we have 2 lives now. I'm going to hop down here. Boom! And we died again. We only have 1 life left. Now remember, we haven't made any conditions what happens after 0 lives. Normally you would end the game, do something, play some sad music, whatever. And boom, he's dead. There you have it. So now you have some lives, some deadly objects, and we're ready to move on to episode 5. This is John Crespi with monkeyuncle.com. Remember, our tutorials and our templates are available at monkeyuncle.com.